So we're going to talk about 2020. We're going to talk about, a number of things going on there. And, in 2016, I don't know who you voted for. It's none of my business. But is it weird voting for yourself for president? Like, did that feel weird?
At first, yeah. At first, it's like really, really strange. It's really strange to have a website with your name on it. And it's really strange to be referred to as a campaign. And then after a while, you realize it's a brand. You no longer own it. It has nothing to do with you. You don't get the credit or the blame either. So after a while, I just like completely divorced myself from the whole thing. And, that's a good thing because, you really get in the line of fire there. And it's not about you, it's about what you represent. If you represent something, and a lot of politics doesn't represent anything, and it shouldn't be about you. So I have no trouble drawing that line.
Yeah, I mean, I ran for class president in high school, which of course is nowhere close to the same thing. But I did. It was weird when I voted for myself. Like that was a weird moment. I was like, oh, okay, yeah, that feels weird. At some point, there were 5 of us, and I went to an all-boys school, so 5 dudes, and we actually talked about potentially everybody would vote for somebody else, in an act of camaraderie, and then we realized one of us isn't going to follow up on it. One of us in the last minute is going to be like, screw these guys, I'm voting for myself. So we just decided not to do that. We were like, someone wouldn't follow it. I'd imagine you weren't in that situation at any point. I'd imagine Hillary did not approach you and is like, hey, Jill, in camaraderie, I'll vote for you. You vote for me. What do you say?
If there was someone else that I could have voted for, I wouldn't have bothered to run, So that was kind of out from the beginning. But, that leads me to just mention ranked choice voting, which, allows you to ally with, all the candidates that you have something in common with. And that way you're all kind of collaborating. And I think it's so important to be raising the bar now instead of telling, independent political candidates, non-corporate candidates, that they shouldn't be in the race. Political repression is exactly what we don't want. That's a perfect talking point for authoritarianism and fascism. We don't want to be throwing out fascist talking points right now. We want contested elections, and power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has, and it never will, and that demand has to be in the political sphere right now. So, I think it's just so important in these times of really, intense, just political angst, that we be putting out solutions, that we not play into the talking points of the enemies of democracy.
I agree. And that hints at a letter. We're going to talk about some later. But since you brought up ranked choice, now when Dylan Ratigan did a live Jimmy Dore show, he, is for ranked choice voting, as am I, of course. But he thinks that in 10 years we're going to have it everywhere, which I really hope he's right. But I feel like the movement definitely needs a big kind of shot in the arm. I mean, what's your take on that? Do you think we're that close, or where do you think we're at?
I think the floodgates will open, when people hear about it. And the state of Maine is a really good example, because it was passed, like, I think 3 times. The people had to pass it by several referendums because the political establishment doesn't want it. They don't want the competition. They don't want to lose the ability to extort voters, to blame them, shame them, and intimidate them into staying inside the narrow confines of corporate politics. And ranked choice voting really blows that cover. You can't intimidate people anymore. You can't extort their vote by invoking the horror of the greater evil. You got to keep forcing them into the lesser evil, even if that's going to kill you too. And what happened in Maine was that once people got wind of it, they just wouldn't let it go. So every time the legislature would veto it, they just kept coming back, and they would run another referendum, and they just kept winning by bigger and bigger majorities. I think like the biggest majority that anything has ever been won by a referendum in Maine. So finally they prevailed. And when it first began, it was just for a limited number of races, but then they kept expanding it because it was working so great after a while, it became impossible for the legislature to block it. So they're in the process of expanding it. New York City has just adopted it by something like, I think it was over 70% support in their vote. So Massachusetts has it on the ballot now for 2020. We're going to be voting on it. So in spite of the effort to suppress it and deny people their right to a vote that really means something, we need to be able to vote for what we want, not just against what we're against. We got to vote for something. Democracy needs a vision forward. It needs a moral compass. And we're kind of adrift at sea without having that. We got to point our democracy somewhere. We got to be for something. And ranked choice voting lets more voices and more choices come into the election. That brings more people out. What's the biggest reservoir of votes out there? It's 100 million people who don't see fit to give their vote to either of the two parties of war in Wall Street that are being shoved down our throats. So this is a total win-win. And once we get past that wall of suppression and secrecy, I think it's going to be really hard to stop. And I find it hard to take seriously anybody who's whining about principled political opposition. Oh, you guys should just go disappear. Well, if you're doing that and you're not also fighting, to your last drop of political strength, if you're not fighting for ranked choice voting and you're just buying into vote suppression, that's just like clueless and inexcusable.
Yeah, and I was actually going to ask about Massachusetts next because, and you already touched on it, because one of the things I notice about these types of things, like I'm really passionate about city-owned internet, which there's actually a lot of that going on in Massachusetts. I think Charlemont just got it, which is a town of 7,000 people. So, if a town of 7,000 can do it, pretty much any town in the country can. And where that movement is the largest is Tennessee. And the reason that is because Chattanooga has had it since 2014. They invested in early, and people are seeing how awesome it is. My reason for bringing this up, these types of things, they usually spread, and they spread because you see your neighbors, and you're like, that's great. Why don't we have this? And I think you're seeing something similar here. Who's the dog? You have a dog, too?
Yeah. The dog's over there, and the cat's right here. And
do they get along?
It's the lion and the lamb. Yeah,
that is so cool.
They play rough sometimes, and sometimes I have to kind of, closely supervise and separate them. But that's unusual.
Did they grow up together?
The dog came as a puppy, so
okay. So
the dog learned early on that the kitty was a friend.
Aw. That's awesome. So Lucy did not grow up with my cat. I think she's blending into my shirt. You can't really see her all that great, but she says meow. She's on my lap right now. That's what I'm doing with my hands. I'm petting her. But she did not grow up with dogs. And not too terribly long ago, I lived in a house where my roommate had these 3 Chihuahuas. They were these tiny, adorable Chihuahuas. They were very old. One of them was blind. They were, just very chill, meek animals. I actually think they're no longer with us, but she just would stand at the door. They were too old to even walk much at this point. They would just kind of run out in the yard and just kind of explore for a little bit, then go inside. And, again, one of them couldn't even see. And, they would just run inside, and Lucy would just stand at the door and just hiss at them. Like they each got one hiss from her as they ran in, and the blind one didn't always see her, so the blind one would get too close, so she would hiss extra loud at the blind one. And I was like, just leave them alone, they're not hurting you. But anyway, she didn't grow up with them. So I think things like this, getting back to ranked choice voting, I think things like this, they really spread. And so what I would like to see happen, I would really like to see the Northeast just kind of lead this. And then recently, I believe it was our governor here in California, Gavin Newsom, he said that it's just too complicated. That was his excuse. The California Democratic Party, by the way, and I'm sure you know this, but the California Democratic Party is one of the most corrupt organizations I've ever seen. our elections here, we live in one of those, like, it's an open primary if we say so states. So talk about complicated. If they say it's an open primary, it is, but they can decide at any given whim that it's not, and deal with it, voter. And they're saying ranked choice, where you go, hey, my first choice is this, my second choice is this. That apparently is too complicated.
And that's, that's like, it speaks volumes that that's the only objection they can come up with,
Right.
Something that's just like so ridiculous on its face, and voters love it, and they want more of it. And it's as easy as saying, oh, I want chocolate ice cream, and if you don't have that, I'll take banana, or whatever. It's like that complicated. You may be aware, or maybe not, that the California legislature actually passed it. It was supposed to be implemented at the municipal level so that all cities could use it. And that got vetoed, I think it was by Jerry Brown. So, yeah, I mean, the Democratic establishment does not want this any more than the Republican establishment.
Yeah, because that just their two-party duopoly kind of goes bye-bye with that, and they know it. That's why, when they talk about all these things like, oh, we want a coalition and this and that, if you really cared about that, you would be in support of ranked choice voting.
Yeah,
if that was what you really cared about, you'd be in support of ranked choice voting.
Get your news on with Ron. Don't you want to know what's going on? We're getting our news on today. Get your news on with Ron. Don't you want to know what's going on? We're getting our news on today. You can tweet me an article at Ron Placone. We'll go through it together and make it our own. Get your news on with Ron. Don't you want to know what's going on? We're getting our news on today.